The small town of Millbrook, Georgia sat nestled between two pine forests and the quiet waters of the Chattahoochee River. Population just under 8,000. The kind of place where everybody knew everybody and half of them didn't think much of you anyway. This was the home that Sarah Mitchell had tried so hard to escape and where the world had tried to keep her pinned down. Sarah had joined the Army at 22, right after completing her nursing degree. Her mother had wept, not from pride, but from worry. Her father had simply nodded and said nothing. The coffee shop owner downtown had shaken her head sadly, as if Sarah had wasted a good education. And her high school guidance counselor, Mrs. Patterson, had actually said to her face, "You know, Sarah, not everyone is cut out for military life. You might do better finding a nice office job." At 5'6", with shoulder-length dark hair usually pulled back in a tight military bun, Sarah didn't look like what people expected a soldier to be. They expected someone bigger, louder, more aggressive. Sarah was quiet. She listened more than she talked. She had gentle hands from nursing school and a gentler way of moving through the world. The military recruiters had seen her transcript and her test scores and loved her. Everyone else seemed to see her quiet nature as weakness. She spent 12 years proving them all wrong. Sarah served as a combat medic with the 45th Infantry Division, stationed primarily in Fort Marshall, a sprawling military base about 40 miles east of Millbrook. For a decade, she had been deployed 4 times. Iraq, Afghanistan, Syria, and one classified operation in South America that she would never discuss, even with family. Each deployment lasted between 7 to 15 months. Each time she returned, she was harder than before, stronger than before, but somehow more alone. The soldiers under her care called her Doc. They trusted her with their lives. Sergeant Marcus Williams had once told her, "Doc Sarah, you're the bravest person I've ever met, and that's the God's honest truth." But Sergeant Williams had said that in 2018, in a hospital in Germany, while recovering from a bullet wound she had saved him from bleeding out with. By 2022, Sarah was promoted to captain and assigned to Fort Marshall's medical operations as a training officer. This was when things began to change, though not for the better. Fort Marshall was run by a man named Colonel Richard Hartwell. He had been in the military for 38 years. He had spent very little time in actual combat and quite a bit of time in administrative roles. He had connections. He had a West Point diploma. He had a voice that could fill a room. He also had a deep-rooted belief that women were fine in the Army as long as they stayed in certain lanes and didn't get any ideas about real authority. Within weeks of Sarah's new assignment, she and Colonel Hartwell had clashed. It started small. She corrected a training protocol that had been in place for years but didn't align with current Army medical standards. Hartwell dismissed her input in a staff meeting, saying, "Captain, I appreciate the suggestion, but we do things by the book here, the book we've been using." Several officers laughed. Sarah said nothing and filed an updated protocol with the medical command anyway. Then there was the incident with the young medic, Private James Chen. James was gifted but shy, and he was struggling with the physical fitness requirements. Sarah designed him a personalized training plan, working with him early mornings and late afternoons. When Hartwell found out, he called her into his office and told her she was showing favoritism. "You're making the other medics jealous, Captain. It's unprofessional." Sarah tried to explain that she was doing the same thing for anyone who asked. Hartwell simply smiled and said, "Maybe the problem is that you care too much about the enlisted men. In my experience, that's a sign of weakness in an officer." The real break came 3 months later, in July of 2022. Colonel Hartwell was planning Operation Valor, a major training exercise designed to test the division's combat readiness. Sarah was asked to review the medical protocols for the exercise. She spent a week reading through the plans and found something that troubled her deeply. The exercise included a live ammunition component, but the medical personnel weren't positioned correctly to respond to actual casualties if something went wrong. The plan assumed no real injuries, only simulated ones. Sarah prepared a detailed report. She included diagrams, case studies from other exercises where accidents had happened, and specific recommendations for repositioning. She submitted it to Hartwell with a personal memo requesting a meeting. She wanted to discuss the safety concerns face-to-face. Hartwell's response came in front of the entire medical command staff. He held up her report, glanced at it, and said, "Captain Mitchell seems to think she knows better than I do about how to run a training exercise. Captain, did you get any injuries in your previous assignments?" Sarah felt her face go hot. "Sir, with respect, that's not relevant to the medical positioning." "Did you?" he interrupted. "Yes, sir, multiple." "And how many soldiers did you lose under your care?" The room went very quiet. Sarah had lost 3 soldiers in her career, one to an IED that scattered shrapnel across 5 soldiers in her care, 2 to complications from injuries that were simply too severe. She had saved at least 30 others who would have died without her intervention. 3, sir, she said quietly. Hartwell nodded slowly. 3 soldiers died on your watch, Captain, yet you want to tell me how to run my exercise. He dropped her report in the trash can at the side of his desk. Your job is to patch people up when they're broken, not to tell commanders how to do their jobs. Stick to your lane. The other officers looked away. No one defended her. That was the day Sarah realized that in this place, under this command, she would never be seen as anything other than the quiet woman who didn't know her place. Sarah almost submitted her resignation that day. She sat in her small apartment on base and typed out the letter 3 times. Each time, she deleted it. She had 8 years until her full military pension. 8 years was a long time to work somewhere that had made clear what they thought of you, but it was worth it. She had given too much to walk away now. What she didn't know was that the next chapter of her life had already been written by someone far away. And it was a story of loss, betrayal, and a test of strength that would make everything she had already endured seem like preparation for the impossible. In October of 2024, Sarah was called into Colonel Hartwell's office for what she assumed would be another lecture about procedures or budget concerns. Instead, she found him with his feet up on his desk, and next to him stood a man in a Navy uniform. Captain Mitchell, Hartwell said casually, this is Admiral Thomas Chen. He oversees special operations logistics for the Southeast sector. He's got a situation that requires a medical officer. I recommended you. Sarah felt surprise and confusion in equal measure. Hartwell recommending her for something, for a mission with the Navy, nothing about this made sense. Admiral Chen stood and shook her hand. He was older, maybe late 50s, with a warm smile and intelligent eyes. Captain Mitchell, I've reviewed your service record. Your combat medical experience is exactly what we need. We have a humanitarian mission launching in 3 weeks. Remote clinic support in Ecuador. We're setting up temporary medical stations to provide aid to communities affected by recent flooding. We need someone who can manage a small team, think on their feet, and work in difficult conditions. Your record shows you can do all 3. This was real, an actual assignment. Away from Colonel Hartwell, away from Fort Marshall, away from the small-minded atmosphere that had surrounded her for 2 years. When do I leave? Sarah asked. November 1st. You'll be gone for 4 months. You'll work with a team of 5 other medical personnel, engineering support, and logistics. The operation is called Mercy Bridge. Sarah accepted immediately. That night she called her mother for the first time in nearly a year. They didn't have an easy relationship, but her mother needed to know. Her mom cried on the phone the way she always did when Sarah was deployed. Bring yourself home, her mother said. Please just bring yourself home. The next 3 weeks were a blur of preparation. Sarah worked with her team, trained in the specific medical protocols they would use, reviewed the climate challenges of the region, and prepared for conditions unlike anything the United States military medical system usually handled. There were no combat zones in Ecuador. There were no IEDs or ambushes. Just sick people, injured people, desperate people who needed help. For the first time in her military career, Sarah was excited about a deployment. This felt pure. This felt right. On October 31st, Sarah was at Fort Marshall's airfield at 4 a.m., checking her gear one final time. The C-17 cargo plane waited on the tarmac. Her team was getting loaded in. Admiral Chen stopped by to wish her well. He asked her if she had any last-minute concerns. No, sir, Sarah said. We're ready. Good, you're going to do great things down there, Captain. These communities need people like you. He paused, then added something personal. You know, my son is an Army medic, too, inspired by a woman officer who worked with his unit in 2019. She apparently showed him what real leadership looked like. I never met her, but my son credits her with keeping him alive in a tough situation. Sarah wondered who that officer was. She wondered if she had made a difference like that to someone. The flight to Ecuador took 14 hours with a refueling stop. Sarah slept poorly, as she always did before missions. The old instincts kicked in no matter what kind of mission it was. When they landed at a small airfield outside Quito, the humidity hit her like a wall. Warm, thick, and alive with sounds she didn't recognize. The Mercy Bridge operation was set up in 3 different locations across southern Ecuador. Sarah's team was stationed in the town of San Miguel, a community of about 3,000 people in a river valley. They had a small clinic building, a supply warehouse, and a basic sleeping quarters. The landscape was green beyond imagination. Mountains rose in the distance, and the sky seemed impossibly bright blue. For 6 weeks, Sarah's team worked 14-hour days. They set broken bones, treated infections, delivered vaccines, and provided basic medical care to people who had never seen a doctor in their lives. Sarah trained the local nurses. She helped deliver 2 Bobbies. She sat with a 10-year-old girl who was sick with a fever and couldn't be transported to a bigger hospital, and she stayed with her through the night until the fever broke. This was what she had imagined the military could be when she was younger. This was purpose. On December 17th, everything changed. It was late afternoon. Sarah was reviewing supply inventory when one of her team members, Lieutenant Carlos Rodriguez, ran to her looking panicked. A truck had arrived from the main supply center. The driver had a message. A coded radio call had come through. They needed to contact Admiral Chen immediately. It was urgent. Sarah's stomach tightened. In military service, urgent messages from high command usually meant one of 2 things. Something terrible had happened or something was about to. She used the secure satellite communication system they had been given. It took 40 minutes to establish contact with Admiral Chen. When his voice came through, it was tight, formal, and very different from the warm man who had briefed her in Colonel Hartwell's office. Captain Mitchell, listen very carefully. I need you to listen to me, and I need you to trust me, even though what I'm about to tell you isn't going to make sense at first. Sarah's hands felt cold. Yes, sir. There is a man named Viktor Dost. He is a Russian arms dealer. For the last 2 years, he has been working with someone inside Fort Marshall to smuggle advanced military medical technology, specifically trauma response equipment, to unauthorized buyers. This equipment has ended up with non-state actors in Syria and Afghanistan. People have been killed because of this technology being used against American soldiers. Sarah sat down. She felt the room tilt slightly. We have been investigating. We traced the operation to Colonel Hartwell. Everything stopped. Colonel Hartwell has been selling this equipment, Captain. He's been using the Mercy Bridge operation as cover. He's arranging a transaction here in Ecuador. There is a cargo shipment coming to your location in 4 days. We are launching an operation to intercept it and apprehend Dostoy and anyone facilitating this transfer. Sir, Sarah said slowly, what does this have to do with me? Because, Captain, Hartwell now knows that we're investigating him, and he's made a decision. He's reported to the Army that the Mercy Bridge operation went wrong, that there was a medical emergency 3 days ago that we didn't report, that you and one other officer were killed trying to reach a remote community hit by a secondary flood. The words didn't make sense. She was alive, she was sitting right here. He's filing paperwork right now reporting you as KIA, killed in action. Captain Sarah Mitchell is about to be officially dead. Sarah's breath felt trapped in her chest. Why would he do that? She whispered. Because if you're dead, you can't contradict his story about what happened. And he's betting that in the chaos of a cover-up, our investigation gets lost. He's betting no one will dig deep enough to figure out what he's really doing. He thinks he can move the operation forward with a new person in your position. What do I do? Sarah asked. Right now, nothing. You continue your mission. You say nothing to anyone except Rodriguez, who I'm authorizing to know the truth. In 4 days, we move. We intercept the cargo, we arrest Dost and his contacts, and we take down Colonel Hartwell. But, Captain, there's something else. Sir? Hartwell isn't working alone. We have indication that there's a superior officer involved. Someone at a higher command level. We're still trying to identify them. When this operation goes public, it's going to be one of the biggest military corruption scandals in decades. I need you to stay alive and stay safe for 4 more days. Can you do that? Sarah looked out the window at the Green Mountains. Yes, sir, I can do that. Good, Sarah, I know this is overwhelming, but you're going to get through this. And when you do, you're going to be the hero of a story that matters. I promise you that. The phone went silent. Sarah sat in the quiet clinic for a long time, processing. She had been marked as dead. To the Army, to her family, to everyone she knew back home, Captain Sarah Mitchell had been killed in Ecuador. She thought of her mother, who would be getting that notification any moment. She thought of the small town of Millbrook, where people who had doubted her would shake their heads sadly at the news of her death. She thought of Colonel Hartwell, sitting in his office at Fort Marshall, thinking he had solved his problem. She didn't know yet that the most important part of her story was still unfolding. She didn't know that the truth was a storm that couldn't be stopped, and that she would be its thunder. Sarah's mother received the notification on December 17, 2024, at 6:47 p.m. A phone call from someone at Fort Marshall, someone she didn't know, with a voice that sounded practiced at delivering this exact message. "Mrs. Mitchell, I'm very sorry to inform you that your daughter, Captain Sarah Michelle Mitchell, was killed in action today while on a humanitarian mission in Ecuador. She was providing emergency medical assistance when a secondary flooding event occurred. She and another officer were attempting to reach an isolated community when..." The rest of the words didn't matter. Sarah's mother, Ellen Mitchell, stopped hearing after "killed in action." She had received this call every night in her dreams for the past 12 years, and now it was real. She sat on her kitchen floor in Millbrook for 3 hours without moving. She didn't cry. The shock was too deep for tears. Her daughter, her brave, quiet, persistent daughter who had given everything to a country that didn't always recognize her, was gone. The Army would provide a memorial service. The flag would be folded. There would be a nice ceremony at Millbrook Cemetery, even though there would be no body to bury. That was the hardest part, Ellen thought. There was nowhere to put her grief. But 374 miles away, in Ecuador, Captain Sarah Mitchell was very much alive, and she was about to become even more dangerous than anyone anticipated. Admiral Chen had given her the whole picture over the secure line. While Sarah continued her work at the clinic, pretending everything was normal, a full intelligence operation was being mobilized around her. Special investigators were being flown in. The cargo shipment was being tracked. The naval base in Ecuador was being quietly put on high alert. Sarah worked. She treated patients. She saved a man's life when an infection that had been festering for weeks suddenly turned septic. She did all of this while knowing that in the United States, her name had been removed from the living and added to the dead. Rodriguez knew. He had taken the news with the same shock Sarah had felt. They worked together, sharing the secret that sat between them like a weight. They couldn't tell the other team members. The more people who knew, the greater the risk of information leaking back to Hartwell. On December 20th, Sarah wrote a letter to her mother. She didn't know if she would ever be able to send it. She wrote it anyway. "Mom, if you're reading this, then I'm alive and you know the truth. I'm sorry for the pain my death caused you. I'm sorry for the terrifying hours and days you spent believing I was gone. But I need you to understand something. I am not dead. I am not running. I am not lost. I am standing in my strength. There are people who tried to use me as a pawn in a game I never agreed to play. There are people who thought that if they erased me, the truth would disappear with me. But I'm not that easy to erase, Mom. You taught me that. You taught me to be strong when the world tells you that you're not enough. This is almost over, and when it is, I'm coming home, not defeated, coming home as myself. I love you." She folded the letter and sealed it in an envelope. She put it in her footlocker and waited. The night of December 21st, the cargo shipment arrived. A truck pulled up to the clinic's back warehouse. It was driven by a man who introduced himself as from logistics. He had paperwork. Everything looked official. Everything looked wrong. Sarah watched from inside the clinic as he and one of her team members began unloading large crates labeled medical supplies. What no one told Sarah was that federal agents were already positioned in the surrounding mountains. Surveillance was being recorded. The truck had been tracked since it left from a private airfield 60 miles north. The documents were forgeries, but good ones. What no one told Sarah was that the next hour was going to change everything. Admiral Chen's voice came through her secure earpiece at 11:47 p.m. "Captain Mitchell, we're moving now. We have the suspect and the cargo. I want you to get your team somewhere safe. We're about to have some activity in your area." "Understood, sir," Sarah said. She gathered her team. "Everyone to the sleeping quarters now, lock the doors. We're going to have some federal agents moving through here tonight. This is routine. Stay inside, stay calm." Her team trusted her. They did what she said. At 11:53 p.m., 3 black SUVs came flying into the compound. Federal agents in tactical gear poured out, weapons drawn. They hit the warehouse like a precise machine. The driver of the truck tried to run. He didn't make it far. In under 4 minutes, Victor Doste was in handcuffs, the cargo was secured, and a radio operator was calling in confirmation that the operation was successful. Sarah watched from the window of the sleeping quarters. She saw the federal agents move with professional efficiency. She saw the truck driver being zip-tied and read his rights. She saw something shift in the universe, like a heavy weight being lifted. But the most important part of the operation was still to come, and it was happening 5,000 miles away. At exactly the same moment that Victor Doste was being arrested in Ecuador, federal agents raided Colonel Richard Hartwell's home in Fort Marshall. They had a warrant. They had evidence. They had 3 years of financial records, encrypted communications, and witness testimony from other officers who had known something was wrong but had been too afraid to speak up. They found documents, they found money, they found proof. Colonel Hartwell was arrested at 11:52 p.m. on December 21, 2024. The charges would eventually be numerous: illegal arms trafficking, conspiring with foreign nationals, falsifying military documents, and filing false casualty reports. The last charge was going to be particularly important. As Colonel Hartwell was being read his rights in his own living room, his wife standing in shock behind him, Admiral Chen was being briefed on the results. The entire operation had taken exactly 43 minutes from start to finish. 1 hour later, Admiral Chen made a phone call to a number in Millbrook, Georgia. Ellen Mitchell was asleep on her couch when her phone rang. She had been sleeping badly since the notification, her body refusing to find rest. She answered with the voice of someone who had no hope of good news. "Mrs. Mitchell, this is Admiral Thomas Chen with the United States military. I'm calling with information about your daughter." Ellen's voice cracked. "Yes. Your daughter is alive. Captain Sarah Mitchell is alive and safe. I know you received notification that she had been killed. That was false information filed by Colonel Hartwell as part of a conspiracy. Sarah is alive, and she's going to be coming home very soon." Ellen didn't scream, she didn't cry. She simply breathed as if breathing was something she had just relearned. "She's alive," she whispered. "She is, and she's a hero. She's going to be recognized for her courage. But first, I think you should know the truth about what happened, all of it." Ellen Mitchell sat on her couch in the small house in Millbrook, while an admiral explained how her daughter had not been erased at all. How Sarah had stood strong while the world believed she was dead. How that strength had been exactly what was needed to take down people who had been betraying their country and their soldiers. When Ellen hung up the phone, she stood up. She walked to her kitchen window. She looked out at the small town where people had always underestimated her daughter, and she smiled. The army moved quickly once the investigation was public. Sarah couldn't leave Ecuador immediately. There were still reports to file, evidence to document, her testimony to record for the federal prosecution. But word of what had happened spread through military circles like lightning. A captain had been marked KIA as part of a cover-up. The operation had been designed to catch foreign arms dealers. Colonel Hartwell had been using a humanitarian mission as a cover for international weapons trafficking. And the entire conspiracy had been unwound by soldiers doing their jobs with integrity. By December 27th, Sarah's status had been officially changed from KIA to injured in action. By January 2nd, to active duty. The Army decided not to make a huge spectacle of her return. There was an investigation going on, legal proceedings to consider, but word got out anyway. Military communities are small and information travels fast. Sarah finally left Ecuador on January 8, 2025. She flew from Quito to Atlanta, then drove south toward Fort Marshall. Her mother wanted her to come straight home to Millbrook, and Sarah promised she would, but first she needed to close the chapter she had lived in that military base. She walked onto Fort Marshall as a different person than she had left, not because anything external had changed, but because everything had. The first person to meet her was Admiral Chen. He shook her hand, and his grip was warm and firm. "Welcome back, Captain. How are you holding up?" "I'm fine, sir," Sarah said, and she meant it. "I'm ready to face what comes next." What came next was a full debriefing with investigators. Hours of questions. All of it was important. All of it was necessary. She answered every question with the clarity and detail that had served her well in 12 years of service. She explained what she had observed about Hartwell's management. She provided testimony about the moments she had recognized his contempt for her competence. By the end of the third day, the lead investigator, a woman named Agent Patricia Delgado, shook Sarah's hand and said, "Captain, what you've done here is bigger than you probably understand. Hartwell wasn't just corrupt. He was connected. There's going to be more than just him facing charges when this is all done. You did the right thing, even when the right thing was almost impossible." Sarah was given a week of rest before her next assignment. She spent it in Millbrook with her mother. Ellen Mitchell held her daughter for a long time when Sarah walked through the door. They didn't need many words. The hug said everything. That night, they sat on Ellen's porch, looking out at the dark street where Sarah had played as a child. "I was so angry with you for joining the military," Ellen said quietly. "Did you know that?" "I had a sense," Sarah replied with a small smile. "I was angry because I thought you were running away from something. Turns out you were running toward everything you needed to learn about yourself." Ellen reached over and squeezed Sarah's hand. "I'm proud of you. I have been your whole life, even when I was mad. I want you to know that." Sarah felt something settle in her chest. She had spent so many years proving herself to people who didn't believe in her. But she realized in that moment that the person whose belief mattered most had always had it. Ellen had just needed to find the words. On January 16th, Sarah returned to Fort Marshall. She was shocked to find a large gathering waiting for her at the medical wing. Her team from Ecuador was there, officers she had trained, enlisted soldiers she had worked with over the years. Admiral Chen stood at the front of the room. "Captain Sarah Mitchell," he announced, "you are being presented with the Meritorious Service Medal for your courageous actions in support of Operation Mercy Bridge, and for your exceptional service in the investigation of conspiracy and illegal arms trafficking. You are a credit to the United States Army and to the ideals we all took an oath to uphold." The medal was pinned to Sarah's chest. The room erupted in applause. Sarah's eyes got wet, but she didn't let herself cry. Not yet. There was one more thing she needed to do. She requested an audience with the Fort Marshall commander, General Patricia Oswald. General Oswald had taken over the base immediately after Hartwell's arrest. She was professional, sharp, and from what Sarah could tell, someone who believed in actual military standards rather than who was the loudest person in the room. "Captain Mitchell," General Oswald said, gesturing for her to sit, "I want to tell you that what you did was extraordinary, but I also want to tell you something else." Sarah waited. When Colonel Hartwell was running this base, there was a culture of silence. People knew things were wrong. People knew his rules were based on personality rather than principle, and no one spoke up except you. One person, one officer, who was willing to do the right thing even when no one else was. General Oswald leaned forward. "I'm recommending you for a position, major's rank and a promotion to Deputy Director of Medical Operations for the Southeast Sector. The position would take you away from this base, away from the memories of Hartwell. You would be overseeing medical standards for 4 different installations. It would be a significant step up in your career. I wanted to offer it to you personally, and I wanted to tell you why, because we need officers like you. Officers who are not afraid to be honest. Officers who understand that strength isn't about volume, it's about character." Sarah accepted without hesitation. As she was leaving General Oswald's office, the general called out one more thing. "Captain, we should probably get used to calling you Major now. Some people are born to lead. Some people are trained to lead. The very best soldiers are both. You're one of the very best." That night, Sarah drove through the streets of Millbrook. She passed the old coffee shop where the owner had doubted her. She passed the high school where Mrs. Patterson had told her she wasn't cut out for the military. She passed the cemetery where her own memorial service had been planned. She wasn't running away from any of it. She was driving through it as herself, whole and real and alive. What Sarah didn't know was that the final part of her story was still unfolding, and it was going to be the most powerful moment of all. Colonel Richard Hartwell's trial was set for June 2025 in federal court in Atlanta. The prosecution's case was airtight. The evidence was overwhelming. Hartwell had sold military medical equipment, specifically portable trauma response systems used by Army medics, to private contractors who then sold them to hostile actors in the Middle East. The equipment had been used to treat wounded combatants. That equipment had been used by enemy forces to continue operations that resulted in American casualties. The body count was significant. 23 American soldiers could be traced to operations where Hartwell's equipment had played a direct role in the mission's tactical capabilities. 23 soldiers who would still be alive if Hartwell had kept his oath. But what made the case truly explosive was the revelation that Hartwell had not acted alone. Admiral Thomas Chen, in his testimony before Congress, revealed that the investigation had uncovered financial transactions pointing to a general. Major General Daniel Stratford, who served as Hartwell's superior at the regional command level, had known about the operation. Stratford had accepted bribes. Stratford had helped facilitate the transfers by providing false clearances and moving shipments through military logistics systems. Major General Stratford was arrested on January 26th. He would face the same charges as Hartwell, plus additional charges of conspiracy and abuse of command authority. The military community was shaken. The public was shocked. Editorials were written about corruption in the system. News programs did investigative specials. A scandal that had seemed to be about one corrupt colonel was revealed to be something much deeper, a conspiracy that reached higher in the chain of command than anyone had initially realized. And at the center of the investigation that had exposed it all was a woman that most of the world had never heard of. Sarah's name was released to the public in early February. Captain Sarah Mitchell, now Major Sarah Mitchell, became known as the officer who had maintained her integrity even when falsely reported dead, who had cooperated with federal investigators from a foreign country, who had helped take down one of the largest military corruption scandals in recent military history. The media wanted interviews, news stations called, reporters showed up at Fort Marshall. Sarah declined all of it. She had done her job. She didn't need recognition beyond that. But her mother had other ideas. Ellen Mitchell called the Millbrook newspaper. She called the radio station. She told the story of her daughter who had been a quiet, dedicated person that people had always underestimated, who had gone away to serve her country and had done so with honor, who had come back not just alive, but with the truth, no matter what the cost. The Millbrook Gazette ran a full-page story about Sarah. The headline read, "OUR Hero, How a Small-Town Girl Exposed Military Corruption." Coffee shop owner Linda Peters called Ellen and apologized. Mrs. Patterson, Sarah's high school guidance counselor, called Ellen and admitted that she had been wrong about Sarah. The whole town, it seemed, suddenly wanted to claim credit for knowing all along that Sarah Mitchell was exceptional. Sarah took it all with good humor. She understood that people need heroes. She understood that the story of a woman who had been doubted but had proven herself was powerful and meaningful. She also understood that she had done what she did not for recognition, but because it was the right thing to do. In March, Sarah was invited to speak at the Army's Command and General Staff College in Fort Leavenworth, Kansas. She gave a lecture to 200 junior officers and non-commissioned officers about the importance of maintaining integrity in the face of command corruption. She talked about what it meant to speak up when something was wrong, even when it was dangerous or difficult. At the end of the lecture, an older major stood up and said, "Captain Mitchell, I mean Major Mitchell, I served under Colonel Hartwell 8 years ago. I suspected something was wrong with his operation even then. I just didn't have the courage to do what you did. I want to thank you for being brave when I wasn't." Sarah nodded at him. "Thank you for serving. We all face moments where we have to choose who we're going to be. I'm just grateful I had the chance to make that choice." June came. Hartwell's trial began. Sarah testified. She sat in the witness stand and calmly explained the timeline of events. She described the way Hartwell had dismissed her concerns about safety protocols. She detailed his reaction when she had filed updated medical procedures. She described the moment she learned that he had marked her dead. Under cross-examination, Hartwell's defense attorney tried to portray Sarah as a woman with a grudge. "You had conflicts with Colonel Hartwell, didn't you, Major Mitchell?" "Yes," Sarah said. "I disagreed with his medical protocols and his management style, but that's not why I cooperated with this investigation. I cooperated because the truth mattered more than my feelings about a superior officer." "And you expect this jury to believe you had no desire for revenge?" Sarah looked directly at the jury. "What I want is for people to take their oath seriously. Colonel Hartwell took an oath to the Constitution and to the soldiers under his command. He violated that oath for money. That's not about me and my feelings. That's about whether we, as a military, still mean what we promise." Hartwell was convicted on June 18, 2025. He received a sentence of 25 years in federal prison. Major General Stratford's trial followed shortly after with similar results. The scandal was eventually referred to by military analysts and historians as the Mitchell exposure. That term annoyed Sarah to no end, but she was assured by her press officer that there was no stopping how history wanted to tell the story. On June 20th, Sarah was promoted to lieutenant colonel and given a new assignment. She would become the director of military medical ethics for the U.S. Army Medical Command. It was a position that didn't exist before. It was created specifically for her, based on the recommendation of General Oswald and Admiral Chen. "We need someone in that position," Admiral Chen explained when he congratulated her on the new assignment. "Someone who has proven they understand what it means to maintain integrity when the pressure is to compromise it. You've earned the right to help ensure that no officer in this army ever feels like they have to choose between their oath and their safety." Sarah's mother came to the promotion ceremony. Ellen Mitchell watched as the new insignia was pinned to her daughter's uniform. She watched as other officers shook Sarah's hand and congratulated her. She watched as her daughter, the girl that so many people had doubted, underestimated, and dismissed, stood straight and tall and absolutely certain of her own worth. After the ceremony, Ellen pulled Sarah aside. "I have something for you," Ellen said. She handed Sarah a small box. Inside was an old photograph. Sarah and Ellen from when Sarah was about 9 years old. They were at a park, and Sarah was showing her mother something in the grass, pointing with excitement. Ellen looked happy and proud. "I used to look at this picture during your deployments," Ellen said. "Every time I was scared, I would look at it and remember who you were before the army made you harder. You were always this strong. The military just gave you a place to use that strength, but that girl in the photo, she's still inside you." Sarah held the photograph and felt something release in her chest, something she had been holding since the day she was marked dead. She hugged her mother tight. "Thank you," Sarah whispered, "for always believing I was enough." "You were more than enough," Ellen replied. "You were everything." The dedication ceremony for the new memorial garden at Fort Marshall took place on September 15, 2025. It was built in honor of all soldiers who had been casualties of military corruption and injustice. At the center of the garden was a bronze statue of a female soldier in medical uniform, looking forward with quiet strength. The statue was titled, "Courage in Silence." Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Mitchell stood with her mother at the dedication, listening to General Oswald speak about the importance of integrity, and about the soldier who had proven that one person, acting with courage and principle, could change everything. "We are honoring today not just the soldiers whose lives were affected by the corruption that was exposed," General Oswald said, "but the officer who had the strength to maintain her oath even when the entire system told her she was disposable. We are honoring the principle that no one, no matter how quiet, no matter how often they have been underestimated, can be truly erased if they refuse to be." Sarah was called to the podium to say a few words. She stepped up to the microphone and looked out at the crowd. There were soldiers, officers, civilians. There were news cameras. There were people who had traveled from across the country to be here. She thought about all of it, the doubt, the dismissal, the moment she learned she had been marked dead, the 4 months of pretending to be a ghost while gathering the truth, the promotion, the recognition, all of it. "When I was 12 years old," Sarah began, "my mother told me something I never forgot. She said, 'Sarah, you don't have to be the loudest person in the room to be the strongest. You just have to know who you are and never apologize for it.'" She paused, looking at her mother in the crowd. Ellen was crying. "I spent most of my military career trying to prove that she was right. I tried to prove it by being a better medic than the other medics. I tried to prove it by working harder, caring more, and never complaining. And you know what I learned? I didn't need to prove anything. I was enough exactly as I was, quiet, dedicated, committed to the truth, even when the truth was unpopular or dangerous." Sarah's voice grew stronger. "The people who conspired to commit fraud, who put soldiers' lives at risk for profit, who tried to erase me so I couldn't tell the truth, they thought that marking someone dead made them less dangerous. They were wrong. They thought that silence meant safety. They were wrong. They thought that a quiet woman who didn't fight or shout or demand attention was someone who could be dismissed. They were profoundly, fundamentally wrong." The crowd was completely silent. "So here is what I want to say to anyone listening to this, whether you're a soldier or a civilian, whether you're powerful or powerless, whether you've been told you're enough or you've been told you're not. Your voice matters. Not because it's loud, but because it's yours. Your integrity matters. Not because everyone sees it, but because you know where you stand. Your strength matters. Not because it looks like everyone else's strength, but because it's real and it's yours. Sarah looked directly at the camera. I was marked KIA. I came back alive with the truth and with the determination to change the system that failed so many soldiers. I did that because I refused to be erased. And that power to refuse to be erased, that belongs to every single person here. Use it. Use it now, use it today. Don't wait for the perfect moment or the right circumstances. They may never come. What comes is your moment right now to decide who you're going to be. Sarah stepped back from the podium. The crowd erupted in applause. News coverage of the ceremony reached every major outlet. Sarah's words went viral on social media. Military analysts debated the implications of what she had said. Within 48 hours, she had received over 10,000 messages from people around the world saying that her words had meant something to them. A young female officer in Japan wrote that Sarah's speech had given her the courage to speak up about sexual harassment in her unit. A civilian woman in Pennsylvania wrote that Sarah's story had inspired her to go back to school, to become a doctor after her family had told her she wasn't smart enough. A teacher in rural Montana wrote that he had shown Sarah's speech to his class and asked them to think about what it meant to maintain integrity in a world that sometimes rewards compromise. Sarah read every message that she was shown. She understood that the impact of what had happened went far beyond her own story. She understood that sometimes a single person, acting with integrity and courage, creates ripples that affect thousands of people they will never meet. In October, she was invited to speak at a women's military conference in Washington, D.C. She shared the stage with generals, senators, and military leaders from across the world. She spoke about the importance of diverse leadership and about what happens when systems allow corruption to flourish unopposed. In November, she returned to Millbrook for a town celebration. The entire town came out. There was a street parade with a float featuring her photo. People lined the streets. The mayor presented her with the key to the city, which made her laugh because she had left town wanting to escape, and now she was being honored for being who she had always been. She went to dinner with Mrs. Patterson, her old guidance counselor. They sat in the same coffee shop where Linda Peters had shaken her head sadly about Sarah's future. "I owe you an apology," Mrs. Patterson said. "I should have encouraged you to be yourself instead of pushing you toward what I thought you should do." "You did the best you could with what you knew," Sarah said. "And I appreciate the apology, but I don't need it. I got where I needed to be. Some of us just have to take the long road." By December 2025, exactly 1 year after the operation that exposed the conspiracy, Sarah had been approached by a publisher about writing a book about her experience. She agreed to think about it. She also had been asked to help establish new protocols for investigating corruption within military medical command structures. That work was ongoing and deeply important. She was no longer the quiet woman that people overlooked, not because she had changed, but because the world had finally caught up to understanding who she actually was. One evening, standing on the porch of her new house, a small cabin outside Millbrook that she had bought with money from her new position, Sarah called her mother. They talked about the book deal, about her new role in military ethics, about a promotion that might be coming. "I'm proud of you," Ellen said. "Every single day I'm proud of you." "I know, Mom," Sarah said, "and now I actually believe it." As the sun set over the pine forests and the river that had shaped this small town, Sarah Mitchell sat in quiet reflection. She thought about the girl who had left Millbrook at 22, desperate to prove herself. She thought about the soldier who had been marked dead. She thought about the officer who had been brave enough to tell the truth. All of those people lived inside her now. All of them made up who she was. The thunder had returned with her name on it, and it had changed everything. In the distance, a storm rolled in from the horizon. Sarah watched it approach, and she smiled. She had never been afraid of storms. They were just weather after all, powerful and loud and real, but so was she.